So today is an exploration of various factors which give rise to change, and a quick whistle-stop tour of change models and change theories. I am sharing with you, when we go into breakout rooms for some practice, some in non-virtual world, in the real world, they are actually postcards, but for today they're on a Google document. They're called No Stone Unturned cards, and each card contains an approach to change that I think is really useful for you. So my plan is that I'll talk for probably about half an hour, do input. Please use the chat to ask questions. Roman and Daniel are going to check the chat for me. And then we'll go into breakout rooms in threes, probably twos or threes, depending on how many of us there are, to play with these cards, to play with the idea of different ways of working with change. Overarching my passion about change is an equal passion about coaching not being just a cozy chat, but coaching being a dynamic, emotionally charged, sometimes memorable experience. And the need for coaches to really understand how lots of different ways in to bring about change are required, rather than just like a one hit and we think the change is done. So that's the thinking behind this. Everything we're doing today is relevant to organizations, teams and individuals, and it's also relevant to any situation where change is desired or required but doesn't seem to be happening. So this can be a kind of way of generating change where behaviours are entrenched. Okay. So, you know, not a highly theoretical statement, but a truth as far as I'm concerned. Change can be difficult and complex. There are very many things which keep us held in familiar patterns of behaviour. They can be emotional links, they can be physical habits, psychological, cognitive, historical, familiar or familial, you know, remember, other people keep us held in certain ways of being. It can be neurophysiological conditioning that keep us doing things the same way. And you will see here in this picture, it's not my kitchen. I wish my kitchen looked that clean and tidy, but it's a picture of a kitchen and a kitchen bin. And just like Isaac Newton once had an apple fall on his head, in my kitchen one day, I realized something about how hard change can be. I had to move to my kitchen bin to a place that was far more convenient. You know, when you move house and you just have to decide in a day where everything goes on that one day, you have to decide where you're going to put all the things. So I put the bin somewhere, and some years later I thought that bin is absolutely not in the right place. The bin needs to be somewhere more convenient. So I moved the bin, and then I realized that several weeks later I was still walking over to where the bin used to be. And I suddenly thought to myself, here is a prime example of a very everyday change that has no kind of jeopardy attached to it. It was a change I desired, it was a change I implemented, it was a change I could see on a daily basis. And still, every time I had a banana skin, I walked over to where the bin used to be. And I really thought, okay, if it's hard enough for me to know to go where the new bin is. How can our clients, how can our teams, how can our organizations make massive changes to their thinking, their processes, their behaviors with one kind of team intervention? So it kind of gave rise to some thoughts about all the things that I know about change, which I'm going to share with you now. Some examples of changes particularly that are beneficial to us and that we don't always maintain. So surveys show that people who've had gastric band surgery even revert to their previous weight. People who have gastric band surgery have been seen ordering takeaways while still in hospital, whilst recovering from weight reduction surgery. A recent study by Susie Orbach, who is a psychologist who writes particularly about weight issues, has identified a staggering 97% recidivism rate for people who have lost weight. They put it back on again. There's lots of evidence of people who win large sums of money via the lottery or in other ways, losing all their winnings, giving away all their money unconsciously, reverting, in each case, reverting to the state which is oh so familiar and at some level comfortable. Research shows that between half to a third of Americans who are on maintenance medications, and importantly, who fully understand why they are on them, don't take them. I strangely do quite a lot of work on change with dentists too. And you know, this reinforces the point that we're not, you know, it's not about knowledge. It's not about acquiring knowledge. We all know this stuff. We all know that we should be exercising regularly and eating healthily and taking the medicines that we need. We also all know that we should be flossing our teeth, but few people do. And the dentists have said to me that when people lose a tooth, they usually take it seriously. And maybe you recognize that with organizations that you work with. When something happens in an organization, we take it seriously. So how can we as coaches prevent people from getting to that point and do something sooner? So there are a number of theories that explain this to an extent. There's a theory by a psychologist called Prescott Leckey, who developed the self-consistency theory. The self-consistency theory kind of does what it says on the tin. It means that we develop a sense of self, that we psychologically and emotionally seek to maintain a consistent sense of self, and anything that contradicts that sense of self, like I am an overweight person or I'm a person without money, is uncomfortable to our very being, and unconsciously we will seek to return to the way that we defined ourselves originally. There's the idea of homeostasis, which comes from actually family therapy and is highly appropriate to teams and organizations. Homeostasis is a term borrowed from biology and botany, which refers to a system's ability to maintain a status quo in terms of, in our body, in terms of our temperature, for example, our blood pressure, that self-regulation that takes us back to a regular state. And that people working with families in family therapy notice that despite all the interventions that they put in, families would, when the family therapist went away, families would just, in an unspoken, unconscious dance, revert back to the behaviors, the relationships, the patterns, the triangulations, the language that they had become really used to. And I'm sure we see this, you know, I see it in my own team, I see it in teams that I work with. It's like a gravitational pull to do what's familiar. Those of you who know NLP will know that NLP also approaches change from the perspective of, you know, what are we getting? We need to be getting something from behaviours that are apparently unhelpful to us. So where's the payoff? What do we get from the apparently unhelpful behaviours? You know, worth thinking about. I've worked with, I'm using personal examples here, but I've worked with people who've lost a lot of weight and, for example, now found that they're attractive to the opposite sex and they don't want to be, and they realise that that weight was keeping them from being in a relationship, which was what they wanted. So there were so many things to think about. And these are all about identity too. Again, organisational, team and individual identity. We subconsciously construct our identity early on, and changes to that construct of our identity can lead us to a lack of self-clarity, to a kind of, I don't know who I am anymore now. And one of the things that we need to consider when we are taking people through change processes is acknowledging what's gone before, not leaving that behind, and finding a continued connection to the person or thing which is no longer there as a healthy part of moving forward and integrating change. Really not kind of cut that off. Organisationally too. I have sometimes I've seen Mayor is here, and I've sometimes done some talks at Dunelm at their headquarters, and I've noticed that Dunelm has a beautiful sort of timeline on their wall, a lovely graphic, and it begins with Dunelm starting as a market stall in Leicestershire, I think, and now becoming the huge organisation that it is. And I think that's a really healthy statement of an organisation that has embraced change, embraced their past and embracing their future. So that I'm drawing with these cards on very many different psychological models and theories that all look at the hidden obstacles to change, not the obvious ones. They all focus on the conflict between where we say we want to be and what's actually happening, the goal and the reality. And that is, those of you who are coaches will know this really, really well, the zone of coaching. You know, if you say you want something and you're not there, then there's the area where we need to coach. All these models suggest that a belief change is required. So it's not knowledge, it's not skills, it's not technique, it's actually what do we need to believe or assume to make this change happen. And for me, a model that epitomizes this approach is the immunity to change model. I don't know how many of you use this, but if you don't, I would seek it out. It's not, it's outside of my No Stone Unturned model, but it supports and reinforces all that I'm talking about. It supports the fact that personal change is not skills-based and cannot be learned. And it also supports this wonderful idea of hidden competing commitments. So what is tethering you to your current behaviour? What's holding you back from making the change, whether that's organisational or personal? And clearly, if the change isn't happening, something else has a higher priority. So I've shared with you here, honestly, this was, I I didn't know whether to do this, but I thought I'm going to share with you my own experience here. And I wanted to share it because this is classic. I want you to think about the things that you've been saying for years that you need to do differently and you don't do them. And that's a really interesting coaching approach. So I wanted to share with you the immunity change model here and the 4 areas to focus on. First of all, you have to identify an improvement goal that you want to make. Then you look at, well, what are you doing or not doing instead of achieving that goal? Then you look at what it might be more important to you, actually. And then you look at what are some of the big assumptions that underpin that. So honestly, I didn't shy away from anything here. My improvement goal, and anyone who knows me will know that I have been saying this for at least a decade. I want to move away from the day-to-day delivery in my business, and I want to spend more time on the strategic aspects of the business. And I want to work 3 days a week. What is the reality? The reality is, hello, here I am, Monday morning on an Agile conference doing some delivery. And that's pretty typical. And I probably work at least 6 days a week still. So you meet me for coaching, I say that, you try all sorts of things, and at the end of the coaching, I'm still doing it. Here are the real nitty-gritty areas you need to go in. Honestly, what are you doing or not doing instead? Well, what I'm doing, not doing instead, is filling my diary. Mark Summers sends me a lovely email, says, will you speak? And I go, yes, of course I will. Even though my PA says, you said you're not going to. And I said, yeah, but it's Mark, you know, there's always a reason. So I'm filling my diary with appointments and meetings and doing things. I'm saying yes to everything. Okay, so why? Really, I think I enjoy the relationships. I think I enjoy the interaction. I like working with people. I like making a difference. Now they're all quite noble. So I like being the star. Did I like what Daniel said about me at the beginning? Yeah, so you have to be really honest with yourself here. And then going a layer deeper, the big assumptions. Can I actually do strategy? Do I really know how to run a business, or am I best at this? Will doing strategy give me the love that I get, you know, the rewards that I get? And then going a little bit deeper. I don't want time to think. There are things in my life that have been challenging, and maybe this stops me thinking about them. And bigger than that still, I'm knocking on a bit now. I'm getting quite old. And am I a bit frightened about if I stop, will I suddenly start gardening and knitting? And you see, really, with a bit of honesty and those 4 columns and some good coaching questions, you can get to why the change isn't happening. And you can apply this in organizations too in exactly the same way. We even in my small team, like Chinese whispers, as new people have come into the organization, they have received the message from others that Barefoot doesn't sell. We don't do selling. And then eventually a new person comes to me and says, I know you don't sell, and I'm like, hang on, what do you mean we don't sell? Of course we sell. But you know how those assumptions grow and need to be challenged. So this can be really perfect with teams and organizations too. What we know about change, what we really know about change, and when it does happen, is that there are certain key elements in place. This is from the work of Jack Mesirov, a great change agent and expert in transformational learning and transformational change. And he identified the situations which give rise to critical self-reflection and therefore change. A disorienting dilemma, your tooth falling out, you know, it maybe comes to that. Or in my case, I crashed my car really badly. I had a really bad car accident. And I kind of knew in the back of my head when I was driving that I was starting to get a bit sloppy. I kind of knew it. I got a bit cocky, complacent. And it wasn't until I smacked into another car, and it could have been really, really serious for both of us, that I suddenly relearned and embraced and embodied all those changes that I knew I should have done. Being in a general state of puzzlement can bring about questioning and therefore transformation. The recognition that we're not alone and that others share our feelings can be transformational. And the presence of what Mezirow calls an empathetic provocateur. Lovely phrase. Someone who supports and challenges in equal measure. Someone who doesn't shy away from having those difficult conversations like I just shared with you about, what do you really fear here? I don't know who said this. It's sometimes attributed to Freud, and it's sometimes attributed to Jonathan Swift. And I'm not sure that anyone can find that out now. But the thing that I said was that you can't reason someone out of something that they weren't reasoned into. And on the Barefoot program, we teach this simple equation about how we come to believe some of the things we believe about ourselves and the world around us. And the equation has 3 elements: the presence of an authority figure, the necessity that the person meeting the authority figure is in a state of suggestibility, which often means that they're young and haven't had many life experiences, and the also presence of high emotion. So if an authority figure says something to you, gives you a message that elicits in you high emotion, either positive or negative, you're very likely to change a belief about yourself. And those messages can be delivered in 3 separate ways. They can be by repetition, someone constantly telling you, you know, I often work with highly successful people, and they usually say at some point, my dad or my teacher or somebody important in their lives always told me you can be anything you want to be. That can be positive, and unfortunately it can be negative. Sometimes we inadvertently label our children too. We say, oh, you're the sporty one, or you're the artistic one, or you're the pretty one, or you're the clever one. And children in their state of suggestibility will develop beliefs about themselves around that. It can be a one defining moment, you know, like your tooth falling out, for example, something that elicits high emotion in you. And when you're in a state of suggestibility, you can change a belief about yourself just like that. Or it can be by osmosis. We can catch from the way that other people behave, particularly our parents, how we behave. So if you have parents who are real people pleasers, who don't stand up for themselves, it's quite likely that you will end up that way. So if we think about what got us to believe the things that we believe about ourselves, you will see that Freud or Swift were very wise in that statement, because you will all know that telling somebody, for example, who has a real difficulty challenging their team, coping with conflict, dealing with underperformance, somebody who has a real people-pleasing trait, if you just send them on an assertiveness course, it probably won't do it. If you tell them to say no, if you give them a good talking to, but if you start to look at what sits beneath it, you've got more chance of bringing about change. And you've got even more chance of bringing about change if you actually apply this equation in your change work. So as coaches, you have some authority probably. As leaders, you have some authority. Use that power wisely. When you're working with people and you want to bring about change, make sure you elicit some positive emotion. Use repetition. Tell them over and over again what a great job they're doing. Praise them. Point out every time you notice a skill or aptitude or attitude in them. Take opportunities to find big moments to make an impact with them, which we're going to pick up on in a moment in the No Stone Unturned cards, and role model the behaviours you want to see. Be an instrument of change yourself. We know from neuroscience now, emotional experiences, whether good or bad, leave strong traces in the brain. I don't believe that coaching should be a transactional exchange. I think it should be an exchange that includes emotion, excitement, and is memorable. And it's more likely that the change will happen in that way. I decided not to refer to COVID in this session too much, but actually look what's happening now. You know, this is a disorienting dilemma. It's a state of puzzlement. We're recognizing that other people are sharing our feelings. People are feeling things, and change is happening quickly in many cases. Okay. I told you it was a condensed version of all the things on the PG Cert, and those who've been on the PG Cert will recognise many of them. So how do they translate into the cards? I want to quickly talk you through the cards, and then I'm going to give you an opportunity to go and play with the cards yourselves in breakout rooms. So the cards are, or the Google documents, the prompts, if you like, are simply that, they're prompts. They accept that there is a complex cocktail of factors anchoring people to doing the same things, organisations to not wanting to make the changes, and each of the cards covers a different area. You can do one at a time, you can do one of the cards for a whole session, you can do all the cards in a big session, you can use them in any order. You can ask the client where they want to start. It's not a sequential process. In order to do the practice sessions, go into it thinking either of a personal change that you would like to make, one of those things maybe that you've been saying for years, I must do this, and you haven't, or a professional change that you would like to make. How can you really show up each time as the best person you want to be? You know, maybe you could use it for that. Or maybe you can think, how could I use this with my team? How could I create a really dynamic, creative process with these cards that could take us to where we want to be? I know you're a creative set of people, so do what you want to with them, but do it with ease, not urgency. I like to see this as a pulling at threads, you know, loosening that tight weave of beliefs and assumptions that we carry around with us. Coaching attitude, I think, that needs to accompany this is an acceptance that where people are is okay, it's valid, and they can change. Just that attitude itself puts you and your coachee in a different place. There's no pressure from you, there's no judgment from you. You're here, what can we do about it? You need to watch your client as well as listen to them for feedback about how they're responding, and validate their feelings. I know it's difficult, and hold them accountable all at the same time. Normalize the situation. Yeah, lots of people are here. Tell stories, as I've done. That helps. Otherwise, we think it's just me that's not able to make this change. Through your role modeling, evoking them an experience of resourcefulness without pressure. Remind them of all the great things they've done, and important in change work, building contingency for relapse. What will you do if you slip back? It's not terrible, it's expected, but have some kind of pathway if you're going to do that. So the cards cover a few areas. I'm going to talk really quickly so that you can go and practice them. Don't ever forget to go back to the beginning. When did this start? What event triggered it? When did you first notice this? Has it got worse, better, or stayed the same over time? In teams, in organizations, when did we start saying that we don't sell? Where does that come from? And has that accelerated or not? What caused us to say that? Get curious about the beginning of things. Obviously, I've talked a lot about beliefs and assumptions. Always ask that question. What are you assuming about this that's stopping you from changing? What are the big assumptions tethering you to this behavior? Then you can ask, what would be a more helpful set of beliefs or assumptions that might take you to where you want to go? Again, organisationally too. I don't think enough teams and organisations look at the underpinning assumptions of that team or organisation and work on changing them. Analyse the real impact. What does it actually cost you? And what does it give you? What's the payoff? And how could you get that payoff without that particular behaviour? Who would you be without this? And is there one good reason not to change? These are just prompts. There are a few good coaching questions that I thought would help you, but please feel free to extemporize, go off-piste with this, use your own. Absolutely key, massive factor in coaching people for change is getting them to look forward in a really felt way, associating their everyday behavior with long-term outcomes. I once watched a TV show about a woman who was close to death, who was hugely overweight, bariatric, I think they call it, stuck in her house. And she was only in her 30s, and she weighed, it was in America, she weighed just so much, I don't know how much, but lots. And the reporters asked her a question. He said, "How did you get this way?" And it really struck me that she said slowly. She said slowly. And that's how we all get everywhere unless we constantly stop and look at where our current behaviours are taking us. So projecting ourselves forward if nothing changes is a really useful thing to do. In fact, those of you who've read the Coach's Case book and who've done the Barefoot course will know that this is one of our absolutely favourite exercises at Barefoot, where we see two potential future versions of ourselves. One that keeps doing the same old, and one that does ends up doing what we want to do. And compare and contrast those two. It's a longer exercise, but if you want to see it in detail, it's in the Coach's Casebook. Another thing to do is ask, how do you do that? You know, so this is a kind of cognitive behavioral NLP style approach. NLP takes the idea that you've learned how to do something. So if I said to you, I'm terrified of public speaking, and you were an NLP coach, you'd say, tell me how you learned to do that. Talk me through it. Teach me how to be terrified of public speaking. So this is a kind of deconstruction of our internal programming. What do you say to yourself? How do you feel to get yourself into that state? And what else could you do? I use rehearsal a great deal in my coaching sessions too, stepping into the shoes of someone you think would deal with it really well, inhabiting their persona, and surprise, surprise, you find that you can probably do it if you just change your perception of who you are momentarily. So these are all, you know, all the things to do. The final one is evidence, which comes later, so we probably won't use this today, but the ICF competencies you might have covered this morning begin with, you know, how will you know that change has happened? What will you see, hear, think, feel, experience? And we need to keep measuring against that. So that's my whistle stop tour. I want to give you the chance to go into breakout rooms with the documents. I think Daniel's going to send them to you. And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Everyone back? Okay, thank you. That was an ambitious project of ours to get everybody in the breakout rooms, and apologies to some of you who were on your own or moved around. We've just got the last 10 minutes really to discuss, to ask questions. I'm keen to know how you experience those questions, and particularly that set of questions in combination with one another. I'll take any questions from you.
Regarding the questions, it's probably good to just have everyone ask on the chat, and we'll pick it up from there.
Thanks, Daniel.
Someone raised his hand.
Zia Malik.
So there was one question. I think I missed the name, but yeah, the human being who just raised the hand, just shoot your question.
Hi, hi guys. Thank you, Kim. That was amazing. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for unmuting the mic. All I was going to share very briefly was that you know, and I was observing just a great coaching conversation, by the way, that just happened. It was lovely to see, even though there's a wealth of kind of you know, kind of a wealth of questions and a framework that you can follow. You know, observing, I noticed that there was a lot of kind of free-forming going on as well. It's almost as if that, you know, you're not wedded to those questions, and I guess, you know, it's, you know, obviously, you know, what's your intention or view on that, Kim, in terms of you know, I guess not having all the answers there in front of you, all the right questions, I suppose, to ask.
Yeah, that's a great observation. My approach to coaching is one of total transparency. So I work so collaboratively, if I can never say it, with the clients, that I would ask them, what question would you like me to ask you next? I would sometimes say, I don't know where to go from here. Like, what would be best for you? And so the cards are there as a prompt for both of us, really. If I'm in a real life space with someone using those cards, or virtually, I would encourage people to say, what else, where else would you like us to go? So they are really prompts, they are topics, and within that, absolutely comfortable for either the coach or the coachee to come up with more questions. It's lovely to hear that was happening. Thank you. Toby?
There is a question on the chat by Andre. I have a question about the beginning card. How do you use it? Is it about identifying a problem, or is it already clear that the coachee wants to discuss something?
Great question. Was that from Alina, I think? Great question.
From Andre Ullmann.
Oh, Andre, thank you, Andre. So sometimes I will spread the cards out in front of my client and say, where would you like to start? And sometimes they may want to start with a really kind of safe look at perhaps what's the cost to me, what's the benefit to me. And they may eventually turn, when they feel more comfortable, to looking at, okay, when did this start? I think the beginning card came about for me because I once worked with a client who, it was a very specific situation. He was a very strong salesman in an organization. He had been a leading salesman. He was great at presenting at big conferences. And one day he became completely phobic about meeting people and seeing and presenting. And I fell into the trap of addressing that presenting issue. And we have a saying, which is the presenting issue is never the issue. But I got stuck in the presenting issue, and the presenting issue was that I thought he was now terrified of public speaking. I think I worked with him for about 9 months before one day I asked the question, what else was going on when this started? And that was the key that unlocked everything. And what was going on was a dreadful situation in his home life where his wife had left him. And actually that prompted the emotional response that was, you know, manifesting itself at work, but it was nothing to do with the work that he was doing. So sometimes there is something important linked to the time that the situation begins. So it is the one that you need to use with most care. But again, it needs to be client-led. Don't know if I've answered your question.
Let's assume until Andre, you know, follows up on the chat and says no or yes. There is another.
Or maybe yes.
Yeah, yes, it was answered. So there is another really cool question by Toby. No stone unturned is a great metaphor. Any other coaching metaphors that are your favorites?
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. You know, you put me on the spot of any other coaching metaphors that are my favorites. Well, one that I use, it's not exactly a metaphor, but it's not a cozy chat. The one that I love is a kind of instruction. And that comes from Timothy Galway, who wrote The Inner Game of Tennis. And he said, and this is for all of us to remember, the ideal end of any coaching session is that your client leaves feeling more capable of mobility. And I think that's something that I have etched on my heart. It's not about always getting that sort of, you know, cut and dried, sorted out ending. But if somebody goes away with a sense of more mobility, you've done some good.
Mm-hmm.
Great
so
question.
that was like at least 3 more metaphors, or at least I heard 3, I think. We have another question. Any tips for using this on oneself, for example, as a personal development tool, being your own coach?
Great, another great question. I think there's no substitute for somebody else in the room with you, somebody else challenging you and supporting you and playing back your own words to you. But in the absence of someone else, I think journaling those questions would be really good. I've just seen a really massive question about the boundaries between coaching and therapy. And that's a very huge question that I don't think I've got time to answer now. I was a therapist before I was a coach. I straddle both disciplines. It's in my short answer to all my coaches is this: the disciplines are merging closer and closer together. The lines are blurring. We now have to coach the whole person in front of us. I think we realized a long time ago that you cannot have a human being in front of you and not deal with their whole being and just coach them about work. At the moment, as long as you know how to identify the signs of anxiety, depression, or mental illness, in which case you refer on, anything else that doesn't suggest that somebody needs more professional medical help, you draw your own lines. You work in the areas in which you feel comfortable and competent. That's my very quick answer to a very complex question.
So there is one, it's more a comment, not a question. And I think with that, we can also wrap it up. Einstein said, if I had 1 hour to solve a problem, I will spend 59 minutes understanding the problem. This is so true. By digging into it, we will find the answers. This is a great summary for what is coaching supposed to do for me, how I understood some of what Kirsten said this morning and also what Kim said. It's the service the coach offers is more about exploring the topic and not finding the solution. And by that creating insights for the client suddenly is able to take the next steps all by their, all by their own. This is a great summary. I didn't know Einstein said that. Take a note. Okay, so let's wrap it up here. Thank you, Kim. That was a really inspiring session, and I'm still kind of amazed how the one card, I was the client in our session, how the one card was spot on, and it was just picking a card from a deck, and now I have new insights. That was really cool. Thank you very much. It was great having you. Yeah, people, now you know Kim Morgan. Follow her and look into her stuff. It's really great. Awesome.
Thank you all for being here. Have a great day, few days, however long you're here for. Really appreciate your contributions. Thank you.